My name is Willard, and for most of my life I've prided myself on being a steady, dependable man. I thought my marriage to Agatha was built on the same foundation, solid, unwavering, and unshakable. But it turns out, even the strongest-looking walls can hide cracks beneath the surface. And sometimes those cracks are invisible until it's too late. Agatha and I have been married for 9 years. We don't have children, and we've always lived a quiet, comfortable life in our little corner of the world. She's always been the lively one, the kind of person who can hold a room's attention effortlessly. I admired that about her in many ways. I felt lucky to have her. But over the last few months, something began to shift between us, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. At first, it was subtle. Agatha seemed distracted. She started coming home later than usual, claiming she was caught up with work. She'd laugh at her phone, quickly locking the screen. When I glanced over her, tone became short, almost impatient when we talked. When I asked her what was going on, she brushed it off, saying, "You're imagining things, Willard. I'm just stressed." I tried to believe her, but that feeling in the pit of my stomach kept growing. It's strange how you can live with someone for years and then one day they feel like a stranger. The distance between us wasn't just emotional, it was physical. She stopped reaching for my hand, stopped leaning into me when we sat on the couch, and stopped laughing at my jokes. I blamed myself. Maybe I hadn't been paying enough attention to her. Maybe I'd been too wrapped up in work. So I tried harder. I planned small surprises, left little notes for her around the house, and made dinner reservations at her favorite restaurant. But no matter what I did, it was like throwing pebbles into a void. She didn't seem angry, just indifferent. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Agatha was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the screen. I was at the kitchen table flipping through some work documents, but I couldn't focus. The air between us felt heavy, like we were sharing the same space but living in entirely different worlds. "Agatha," I said, breaking the silence. She looked up, startled. "Can we talk?" She sighed, putting her phone down. "What's wrong now, Willard?" she asked, her tone laced with annoyance. That stung. I feel like something's off between us," I admitted, my voice softer than I intended. "You've been distant lately. Is there something I should know?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of something guilt crossing her face before she quickly masked it. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, standing up and grabbing her phone. "You're overthinking things again." Before I could respond, she left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. But it wasn't just thoughts. It was a sinking feeling, a quiet voice in my head whispering that things weren't as they seemed. The next morning, I woke up with an idea, a strange, impulsive idea. I wasn't sure where it came from, but it felt like the only way to get to the truth. Over breakfast, I set my plan into motion. "Agatha," I began, trying to keep my tone casual. I was thinking, maybe you should go out this Friday. She raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "What do you mean?" "You've been working so hard lately," I said, forcing a smile. "You deserve a night to relax, to do something for yourself. Maybe even go out on a date." Her fork froze mid-air and she looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "A date?" she repeated incredulously. "With who?" I shrugged. "Whoever you want. I trust you." For a moment she just stared at me, trying to gauge if I was serious. Then she laughed, a short, almost nervous laugh. "You're joking." "No," I said firmly, "I'm not. If there's someone you've been wanting to spend time with, just go. I won't hold it against you." She narrowed her eyes, searching my face for any sign of a trick. When she found none, She leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips. "Fine," she said, "if that's what you want." I nodded, keeping my face neutral, even as my heart raced. "This Friday, then." And just like that, the stage was set. She thought I was bluffing, but she didn't know the truth. I wasn't playing games. This was my way of finding out what she was hiding, because if she walked out that door on Friday night, I'd know exactly where I stood. But I didn't expect what would happen next. This wasn't just about a single date. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And as Friday drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change forever. Friday arrived faster than I expected. The days leading up to it felt like an eternity, every moment filled with doubt and dread. I spent most of the weeks second-guessing myself. Was I crazy for suggesting this? What if I was wrong about her? What if I just handed my wife an invitation to betray me? But deep down I knew the signs were there, subtle yet undeniable. Agatha had become a stranger in our home. The laughter we once shared, the easy comfort of our conversations, the simple touches and gestures that reminded me we were a team. All of it had faded. I couldn't tell if it was gradual or if I'd been blind to it until now, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. I woke up that morning with a knot in my stomach. Agatha was already up, moving around the house with an energy I hadn't seen in weeks. She hummed to herself as she made coffee, glancing at her phone every few minutes, the lightness in her step, the faint smile on her face. It was like she was a teenager preparing for prom, not a married woman heading to work. "Big plans tonight?" I asked as casually as I could manage, sipping my coffee. She looked up, startled for a moment before quickly composing herself. "Just meeting up with some friends," she said, the lies slipping out so easily it made my chest tighten. "Good," I replied, forcing a smile. "You deserve a fun night." She studied me for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to figure out my angle. "You're acting different," she said. "Finally. Am I?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Yeah, you're not usually this understanding." Her words cut deeper than she realized, but I kept my face neutral. "Maybe I'm just learning to let go a little," I said, turning my attention back to my coffee. She didn't respond, but I could feel her eyes on me as I stood up and left the room. The hours ticked by slowly. I couldn't concentrate on work or anything else for that matter. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, trying to make sense of how we'd gotten here. Agatha and I had been happy once, hadn't we? Or had I been fooling myself all along? By the time evening rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves. Agatha came home from work looking more polished than I'd seen her in months. She'd clearly stopped somewhere to get ready a fresh blowout. Flawless makeup and a sleek black dress that hugged her figure perfectly. "You look nice," I said, keeping my tone light. "Thanks," she replied, grabbing her clutch from the counter. "Don't wait up for me, okay? Have fun," I said, watching her walk out the door with a mix of dread and determination swirling in my chest. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys. I thought long and hard about whether or not to follow her, and in the end, curiosity and suspicion went out. I needed to know the truth. I parked a few blocks away from the restaurant where I knew she'd be meeting someone earlier in the week. I'd seen a text pop up on her phone while she was in the shower. It wasn't hard to figure out who G was. A guy. She'd been texting frequently over the past month. She didn't even bother to hide it anymore, probably assuming I was too clueless to notice. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I watched her walk into the restaurant. A tall, broad-shouldered man greeted her at the entrance, his hand resting on the small of her back as they walked inside. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to lose it. I waited for over an hour, my thoughts spiraling in 1,000 directions. What were they talking about? How long had this been going on? Was this just emotional, or had it crossed the line into something physical? When they finally left the restaurant, I saw her laugh at something he said, leaning into him. As they walked down the street, my chest tightened and I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to confront them right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. I followed them at a distance, watching as they walked into a nearby bar. The way she looked at him, smiling, her eyes bright and full of life, was a look I hadn't seen directed at me in months. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just losing my wife. I'd already lost her. Agatha didn't come home until well past midnight. I pretended to be asleep when she slipped into bed, the scent of wine and perfume clinging to her. My heart ached, but I stayed silent. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had my answers now, but the question was, what was I going to do about them? The morning after Agatha's night out was quiet, almost eerily. So she moved through the house as though nothing had happened, humming soft as she prepared her coffee. I sat at the kitchen table pretending to read the news on my laptop, while the weight of what I'd witnessed the night before pressed heavily on my chest. She caught my gaze as she poured her coffee, offering me a small, almost casual smile. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her tone light, as if we were still the couple we used to be, like a rock. I replied, my voice steady. That was a lie, of course. I'd barely slept at all. The image of her laughing, with that man leaning into him as if he were her world, was burned into my mind. I'd spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what I do next. Should I confront her? Would she even admit to it? Or would she gaslight me, twist the truth until I questioned my own reality? For now, I decided to stay silent. I needed more clarity, more evidence, more understanding of just how far this had gone. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Every interaction with Agatha felt like a performance, like we were both playing roles in a play neither of us wanted to be in. She acted as though everything was normal, cooking dinner, asking about my day, even laughing at my attempts at humor. But I could see through it. There was a distance in her eyes, a flicker of guilt she tried to mask with forced smiles. Meanwhile, I was struggling to keep my emotions in check. The betrayal felt like a lead weight in my chest. But what hurt even more was the realization that she didn't seem to feel the same way. She didn't seem burdened by what she'd done. Or maybe she thought I was too blind to notice. At work, I was a mess. I'd sit at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, unable to focus on anything. My coworkers noticed, asking if I was feeling all right, but I brushed them off with excuses about being tired. Tired didn't even begin to cover it. By the time Friday rolled around again, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, pretending everything was fine while my marriage fell apart in front of me. If Agatha thought she could continue this double life, she was wrong. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I decided to test her. I wanted to see if she learned anything from the last time, or if she still thought I was clueless. "You know, I began cutting into my steak last week. Seemed to do you some good. You came home looking refreshed." Her fork froze midair, and for a split second her mask slipped. But she recovered quickly, offering me a tight smile. "It was nice to catch up with friends," she said, her voice steady. I nodded, pretending to accept her lie. "Well, if it helped, maybe you should do it again another night out. What do you think?" She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to read my intentions. "You're okay with that, of course," I said, keeping my tone light. "I trust you." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but I forced myself to say them that night. She was more cautious. She waited until I was in the shower before texting someone. I assume it was him because her phone was locked when I came out. But I wasn't stupid. She thought she was being clever, but her patterns were becoming predictable. When Friday arrived, she once again dressed up her movements, deliberate and calculated. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving, saying she wouldn't be late. "Take your time," I replied, smiling faintly. "You deserve it." But this time I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I'd already hired someone to do it for me. A private investigator who had been tracking her movements since last week. If she thought she could keep this up without consequences, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. As I sat alone in the house that evening, the weight of everything hit me. The truth was, I didn't want this. I didn't want to be the kind of man who had to spy on his wife to find answers. I didn't want to live in a marriage built on lies and betrayal. But this wasn't about what I wanted anymore. This was about reality. When my phone buzzed with a message from the investigator, my stomach churned. I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. "They're at the same restaurant as last week. She's with the same man. I'll keep you updated." My hands trembled as I set the phone down. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words BL in together. Part of me wanted to drive to the restaurant to confront her then and there, to demand answers. But I stopped myself. This wasn't the right time. I needed to think, to plan, to figure out what came next. Because when I did confront her, it wouldn't be in anger or desperation. It would be with calm, unshakable certainty. And I would make sure she understood exactly what she'd done and what she was about to lose. Saturday morning came with the kind of eerie stillness that only deep emotional conflict can create. Agatha was already awake by the time I shuffled into the kitchen, her back to me as she made herself a cup of coffee. She wore her usual Saturday morning attire, a loose sweater and leggings, but I noticed her hair was still perfectly styled from the night before. She hadn't even tried to hide it. "Morning," I muttered, grabbing a mug from the cupboard. "Good morning," she replied, her voice light, almost cheerful. I studied her as she moved around the kitchen, humming softly to herself. She seemed at ease, as if the betrayal of the night before hadn't weighed on her conscience at all. It was almost impressive the way she could compartmentalize, but it also made my stomach turn. How long had she been doing this? How long had I been the fool? "So how was your night?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She didn't even flinch. "It was nice," she said, pouring cream into her coffee. "Just caught up with some friends. You know, the usual." The LIE slipped out so smoothly that it made my chest tighten. I forced a smile and nodded, sipping my coffee to hide the bitter taste of betrayal that was building inside me. "That's good," I said, keeping my voice. "Even you deserve some time to yourself." Her eyes flicked to me, narrowing slightly as if she wasn't sure whether or not I meant it, but she didn't press further. Instead, she grabbed her mug and headed toward the living room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The rest of the weekend passed in a haze of small talk and forced smiles. Agatha acted as though everything was normal, while I tried to keep myself from falling apart. The investigator had sent me a detailed report of her evening photos, timestamps, and a summary of her interactions with him. The man she'd been seeing was named Greg, and he wasn't just some random fling. He was someone she'd met months ago at a networking event, and their friendship had apparently blossomed into something much more. Every time I looked at her, I felt a knot of anger and sadness tighten in my chest. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eye and pretend that everything was fine by Sunday night? I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. The silence was eating away at me, and the weight of what I knew was too much to carry alone. On Monday morning, I woke up with a plan. If Agatha wanted to keep playing this game, I was going to play it too. but on my terms. At breakfast, I brought it up again. "You know," I said, casually buttering my toast, "I've been thinking. You seem so happy after your night out. Maybe we should make this a regular thing." She froze mid-seep, her eyes darting to me over the rim of her mug. "A regular thing?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Why not? If it makes you happy, I'm all for it. In fact, why don't we set something up for this Friday? You could go out again, no questions asked." She stared at me, clearly trying to figure out my angle. "You're serious, of course," I said, keeping my voice light. "I just want you to be happy, Agatha. That's all I've ever wanted." Her expression softened for a moment, and for the briefest second I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. But then she nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "All right," she said, "if you're sure." "Oh, I'm sure," I replied, the words heavier than she realized. The week crawled by every day. Feeling longer than the last, I kept my distance from Agatha, avoiding unnecessary conversations or interactions. She seemed to notice but didn't push. Maybe she was too wrapped up in whatever fantasy she built with Greg to care by the time Friday arrived. I was ready. I'd spent the week preparing mentally and emotionally for what I knew was coming. This wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. It was about taking back control of my life, about reclaiming the pieces of myself that her betrayal had shattered. That evening she dressed up again, just as she had the last 2 times. She looked stunning, of course, but all I could see was the betrayal lurking behind her. "Smile. You look beautiful," I said, my voice steady. She smiled, and for a moment it almost felt genuine. "Thank you," she said softly. "Have a good time tonight," I added, watching her closely. "I will," she replied, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my phone. The investigator was already on the move, trailing her as she met up with Greg. This time, I wasn't going to wait around at home. I wanted to see it for myself. When I arrived at the restaurant, I parked my car a block away and walked to a spot where I could see through the large glass windows. There they were, sitting at a small table near the corner, laughing and leaning toward each other like a couple of teenagers. My heart ached as I watched them, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for anger or confrontation. This was the time for clarity, for understanding exactly how far she was willing to take this. I stayed for almost an hour watching as they ate, laughed, and shared a bottle of wine. When they finally left, I followed them at a distance, my chest tightening with every step. They didn't go to a bar this time. Instead, they headed to his car parked a few blocks away. I watched as they stood by the car, talking and laughing until he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't just a quick kiss. It was long, deliberate, and full of passion. The kind of kiss that left no room for doubt about what their relationship had become. My breath caught in my throat as I stood there, frozen in place. This was it. The confirmation I'd been dreading but knew was inevitable. As they drove off together, I turned and walked back to my car, the weight of the truth pressing down on me like never before. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. This was about what came next. The weekend after I followed Agatha and Greg was one of the longest of my life. Every word out of her mouth felt hollow, every smile forced. But the worst part, she had no idea. I knew she still looked at me like I was the oblivious husband, too blind to see the cracks in our marriage. I kept replaying the kiss. In my mind, it wasn't just the betrayal. It was how comfortable she looked, how easy it seemed for her to step out of our life and into his. That realization made my decision clear. I couldn't let this continue. But I also couldn't confront her without a plan. Sunday night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I decided to push her just a little. "You seemed pretty happy this weekend," I said, keeping my tone light. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said with a shrug. "You just seem lighter, I guess, like a weight's been lifted." She hesitated, her fingers playing with the hem of her sweater. "Well, I guess I've been trying to focus on myself more," she said cautiously. It was such a carefully chosen answer that it made my stomach turn. "I think that's great," I said, forcing a smile. "You deserve it." She gave me a small smile in return, but it didn't reach her eyes. Monday morning, I decided it was time to put my plan into action. I reached out to the private investigator and asked him to compile everything, every photo, every report, every detail about her meetings with Greg. I didn't want to confront her until I had everything in my hands by Tuesday. The file was ready. I stared at the neatly organized folder on my desk for what felt like hours, debating my next move. But no matter how I looked at it, the truth was clear. Agatha wasn't the person I thought she was. That evening when she came home, I tried to act normal, but it was getting harder to keep up the charade. "She noticed you." "Okay," she asked as she set her bag down. "Yeah," I said a little too quickly. "Just tired." She studied me for a moment, but she didn't press. "Maybe you should get some rest," she said, her tone unusually soft. I nodded, but I didn't go to bed. Instead, I stayed up late, sitting in the dim light of the living room, flipping through the investigator photos. Each one felt like a dagger to the heart, but I couldn't look away. Friday came around again, and for the first time in weeks, Agatha didn't dress up or make plans. Instead, she stayed home, scrolling through her phone and occasionally glancing at me like she wanted to say something. "You're quiet tonight," I said, breaking the silence. She shrugged, "Just tired." I guess it was a lie, and we both knew it. "You know," I said carefully, "I think we should have a talk about us." Her head snapped up, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I think there's a lot we've been avoiding, and I think it's time to stop pretending everything's okay." She stared at me, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the couch cushion. For a moment, she looked like she might confess, like the weight of her lies was finally too much to carry. But then she shook her head. "Willard, you're overthinking things again," she said, her voice shaky. "Everything's fine." "No, Agatha," I said firmly, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's not." The room was silent, the air between us heavy with unspoken truths. She didn't respond, and I didn't push, not yet. But I knew the moment of reckoning was coming, and when it did, there would be no going back. The days after that tense Friday night were suffocating. Agatha seemed on edge, her usual confidence replaced with a strange nervousness. She started avoiding eye contact, keeping herself busy with anything she could find, cleaning, working late, scrolling endlessly on her phone. It was obvious she felt the shift between us, even if she wasn't ready to address it. I wasn't ready either, but the clock was ticking. I had everything I needed: evidence, clarity, and the grew determination to stop letting her lies dictate my life. The confrontation was inevitable. Now it was just a matter of timing. On Wednesday evening, I came home to find her in the kitchen preparing dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension that lingered between us. She glanced up as I walked in, offering me a strange smile. "You're home early," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Yeah, slow day at work," I replied, setting my bag down. "What's all this?" "Just thought I'd make something special," she said, focusing on the pot in front of her. Special, huh? I said, leaning against the counter. What's the occasion? No occasion, she replied quickly. Just felt like it. I watched her for a moment, noting the way her hands trembled slightly as she stirred the sauce. She was trying so hard to act normal, to pretend everything was fine. It would have been almost admirable if it hadn't been so heartbreaking. Agatha, I said softly, and she froze. What she asked, not turning around. We need to talk. She sighed, setting the spoon down and finally facing me. About what? Willard, you know what? I said, my voice firmer now. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against the counter, her expression guarded. If you have something to say, just say it. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I know about Greg. Her reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath, her eyes widening in shock. For a split second, I saw the mask slip, the guilt and fear flashing across her face, but then she quickly recovered her expression, hardening. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice shaking. Don't do that, I said, shaking my head. Don't lie to me. I've seen the messages. I've seen the photos. I know what's been going on. Her face went pale and she took a step back as if the weight of my words had physically pushed her. Willard, I stop. I interrupted, my voice louder than I intended. Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation that makes this okay. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, like she was trying to find the right words. But there were no right words, and we both knew it. Finally, she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. A few months, she whispered. The air seemed to leave the room. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, even though I'd already known the answer. Hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that nothing else had. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, she said, her voice cracking. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stared at her disbelief and anger swirling inside me. You didn't mean for it to go this far? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, meeting him behind my back. How could you do this to me? To us? I was unhappy, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't feel connected to you anymore. I didn't know how to talk to you about it, and then Greg came along and he made me feel alive again. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand how she could blame this on me, but instead I just stood there silent, letting the weight of her betrayal crush me. That night I slept in the guest room. Agatha tried to talk to me to apologize, but I couldn't face her. I needed space to process everything, to figure out what came next. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that no matter what she said or how much she apologized, things would never be the same. The trust we built over the years was gone, shattered into pieces that couldn't be put back together. This wasn't just a bump in the road. This was the end of the road. The following days were a blur. I moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking, barely reacting. Agatha tried in her own way to fix what was broken. Lingering glances, soft apologies, reaching for my hand when she thought I wasn't paying attention. But I was paying attention, and all I saw was a woman who had made a choice. I hadn't confronted her again, not yet. I needed to be sure of what I wanted before I opened that door, because once I did, there would be no closing it. By Friday, I had my answer that evening, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at my untouched plate. Agatha walked in, hesitating in the doorway. "Willard," she started, her voice soft. "Can we talk?" I exhaled slowly, my hands tightening around my fork. "Go ahead." She took a deep breath and sat across from me. "I need you to know, I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I held up a hand, stopping her. "Agatha," I said quietly, "do you love him?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't deny it. She didn't shake her head. She just sat there, frozen in place. That was my answer. I pushed my plate aside and leaned forward. "You know," I said, my voice eerily calm, "when I told you to go out that night, I wasn't testing you. I was giving you a choice." Her breath hitched. "What are you saying?" I let the silence stretch before answering. I meant every word. Realization dawned on her face. Her eyes widened in panic. "Willard," I stood up. "I packed some of your things," I said, nodding toward the suitcase in the corner. "You're leaving tonight." Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. "No, we can work through this. We can." "No," I said, cutting her off. "We can't." She stood too, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Please, Willard," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake." I looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face, the regret in her eyes, the trembling of her hands. "So did I said. "Finally, I trusted you." The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't argue after that, maybe because she knew there was nothing left to say. Minutes later, she was gone, and for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. The night Agatha left, the house felt impossibly empty. I sat on the couch, staring at the space where she had stood just hours earlier, suitcase in hand, her face pale and tear streaks. The echoes of her apologies still lingered in my mind, but they no longer held any power over me. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt something strange relief. I had spent so much time trying to hold on to something that was already gone. I had convinced myself that if I just tried harder, loved more, ignored less, I could fix what was broken. But the truth was, I had been fighting for someone who had stopped fighting for me a long time ago. And now, I was free. The first few weeks weren't easy. The silence of the house was overwhelming at first, the weight of old memories pressing down on me. There were moments where doubt crept in, whispers of what if and could I have done more. But every time those thoughts surfaced, I reminded myself of one thing. Agatha had made a choice, and so had I. I reconnected with old friends, people I had unintentionally pushed away. While trying to hold my marriage together, I threw myself into work, but not as a distraction. This time I focused on building something for myself, not for someone who had already checked out. One evening, a close friend, Daniel, invited me out for dinner. It was the first time in months that I had genuinely laughed without forcing it. At one point, he clinked his glass against mine and said, "You know, Willard, I haven't seen you look this alive in years." And he was right. Months passed, and with each day the weight lifted a little more. I no longer woke up with a pit in my stomach wondering what lies I'd be fed. That day, I no longer had to pretend to smile through the pain to convince myself that I was happy when I wasn't. One evening, I took a long walk through the park, breathing in the crisp autumn air. I watched as people passed by, some alone, some laughing with friends, some holding hands with the people they loved. And for the first time, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was just me. And that was enough. People say that heartbreak changes you, and they're right. But it doesn't have to destroy you. Sometimes it's the very thing that sets you free. I lost Agatha, but in doing so I found something far more important. I found myself, and that was the greatest victory of all.